I'm Stephanie Wilson, and you're listening to Freedom Over Fascism.
Success means fighting everywhere. As Democrats, we have got to stop looking at success being only flipping a race. Elections are not binary. And there's a lot of progress between someone who's running in a red district to flipping it. And we're never going to make that progress if we don't make that effort.
Hi, friends. Welcome back. I am pivoting the podcast to focus on women who are powering political change, because Black women in particular, and women more generally, are at the center of the pro-democracy movement, from Kamala Harris down to local organizers. I want to lift these women up and show the world the work they're doing, how they're doing it, and what we can all do to help. I have had fantastic conversations with the last 60-something guests, and I'll continue to find inspiring activists, experts, and academics who are help building power for freedom in the United States. I have some really exciting guests coming up, including Emily Kane, former president of Emily's List, former Speaker of the Maine State House, and current member of the New Deal Leaders. I'll also talk to Kim Allen, founder of Power the Vote, to talk about voter protection in Georgia, which will be ground zero, or one, or two, for Trump's efforts to overturn the election. In the meantime, I want to talk about two Republican creations, both of which are endangering a staggering number of lives. The first is the Trump abortion ban. In the last couple of days, we've learned about at least two named women who have died from the abortion ban in Georgia, where in one case, doctors would not provide life-saving care to a woman whose fetus had died. This woman died of sepsis in the hospital. To be clear, this was a completely preventable death because we have the medical tools to remove the dead fetus and save the woman's life. But the Trump abortion bans stopped doctors from acting as they worried about being jailed for life. In another case, a woman with chronic disease had been told that another baby would kill her. So, because she knew she couldn't get an abortion in Georgia, she took matters into her own hands. But her abortion didn't complete, and without the option of a D&C to remove the remaining fetal tissue, she died at home, too scared to go to the hospital. There are more and more stories like this, and they're happening to real people all over Red America. As Tim Walz says, you might not be into politics, but politics is definitely into you. And it'll take all of us doing something more than voting to win. Also this week, J.D. Vance admitted to inventing the story about Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio. This lie and the othering of these legal immigrants in a town where they had been thriving has endangered the entire community of his own constituents. One university closed down for the week because of bomb threats, and an elementary school evacuated its students. The Ku Klux Klan and the Proud Boys marched through the streets with assault weapons, and the community continues to suffer while Trump and Vance try to distract from Kamala's glorious victory and Trump's ignominious defeat in the debate. These continuous outrages are deliberate. MAGA invents one thing after another to distract and divide us, to engage and enrage us, because most Americans believe they are unfit to be president and vice president. And the more they do to enrage us, the more we, in fact, do get distracted because it's so horrifying. But we need to keep going. We need to keep working for Harris Walz and every other Democrat on the ballot. We know there are more of us than of them, and we need to get all of us to turn out to vote. In my conversation with Michele Hornish of Every State Blue, we talk about the need to contest every down-ballot seat in every district in every state, even the reddest. Every State Blue crowdfunds to provide resources to the most under-resourced candidates in Missouri, Ohio, and Tennessee. Because every vote that a down-ballot candidate earns in the reddest areas are likely votes that wouldn't have turned out without a Democrat to vote for. And that trickles up in reverse coattails to the state and national level races. This is one of the primary ways to win back power. And that's to run and support candidates everywhere, in every state, in every county, in every district. So think about what you can do to run for office in the future or support someone who is running now. Redefine success to be actually fielding a candidate at first, and know that we're engaged in a sprint to November in the presidential election and a marathon of power building across the country. Now for my conversation with Michele Hornish. Michele Hornish, welcome to Freedom Over Fascism.
It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really glad to. And I've talked to a bunch of people from your organization, which we should say is Every State Blue. David Pepper was our very first guest. And so I would love for you to talk about what Every State Blue does and what the theory behind the case is, or the
Sure.
theory of the case of change for Every State Blue.
Absolutely. Our mission is to crowdfund for underfunded races, state legislative races in particular, for our state projects in some of the reddest, most gerrymandered, I call them the reddest, roughest, toughest places in the country, right? Because Democrats as a whole, I think we all recognize that we need people in those spaces, in those places, sharing a democratic message and improving upon the results that we've had, rebuilding infrastructure that's been lost over years, sometimes decades, that people have not been running for office. We need people on the ground there. And so, if we need people on the ground there, then we need to support the people who are actually doing that tough work. Oftentimes, as I think you know, the people who are running in those places have a very hard time getting support. And that makes it even tougher to find people to run in those places. So if we want someone to run against that extremist state legislator who is introducing anti trans bills or abortion bans, any number of terrible extremist policies, if we want someone running against them, then we need to support the people who are willing to do that. And that is what Every State Blue's main mission is. To do that, we have different state projects. We have Blue Missouri, Blue Ohio, and Blue Tennessee. And then we also have a national program called Forgotten Democrats, which takes that same state level idea and expands it into congressional races that are also underfunded in some of the reddest areas in the country.
Forgotten Democrats, does that include places? Is it still all state legislative races, or does that include congressional races in blue states that could flip the power of the Congress?
Yeah. So Forgotten Democrats is congressional only. Our state legislative projects are in Missouri, Ohio, and Tennessee. But Forgotten Democrats actually takes the same model that we have, which is only funding underfunded races, and takes that to the congressional level. So a lot of folks don't know how many congressional races have been uncontested and undersupported, right? So the same issue that we have in state legislative races, we also see in congressional races.
Mhm.
So 23 congressional races were completely uncontested in 2022. Another 130, I believe, were underfunded. So some of these folks have 20, 30, $40,000 for a congressional race. And if we want people to run in these gerrymandered districts against some of the worst Republican legislators in Congress, then we need to give those people the resources that they need to be effective too. That is actually our process in the state legislative projects that we have in Blue
Mhm.
Missouri, Blue Ohio, and Blue Tennessee. I mentioned that we fund the underfunded races, but we're unique. I think we're the only organization in the country that funds races the way that we do. We use
Mhm.
what I call a bottom up bathtub method, where we fund first the races that have the least. So in Ohio in 2020, there were 13 state legislative races that had less than $5,000. 13 state legislative races in Ohio in 2020 had less than $5,000. This year, because of Blue Ohio, no Democratic nominee for Ohio state legislature will have less than $11,087.
That's
That is
amazing.
because of it's amazing. It's incredible. And that is the power of the grassroots communities that we are able to build, where we have folks in Ohio and in Missouri and in Tennessee who are calling me up and telling me that there are things that they can afford now that they never could have afforded before.
Right.
We have incredible stories from people who are just thrilled and feel like the $5,000 check or the $3,000 check that we sent them was an absolute game changer for their campaign.
What does success look like? I know we're not gonna win all of these races, and to my mind, success looks like bringing out voters who would never have come out because they didn't have anyone to represent them, but what does success look like to you?
Success means fighting everywhere. As Democrats, we have got to stop looking at success being only flipping a race. There's a lot of progress. Elections are not binary. And there's a lot of progress between someone who's running in a red district to flipping it. And we're never going to make that progress if we don't make that effort. And so
Right.
you're right. It looks like engaging more voters, registering more voters, increasing turnout, getting more volunteers, having somebody run, right? We're all
Right.
talking about building this bench and making sure that there are people who are running for school board, but there are people who are running for state legislature that don't have any support and they need
Right.
help too, right? So
They
there's
do.
all these different levels, there's all these different layers, but progress is progress, and that's what we need to make. So there's a lot that's going on in some of our Blue Ohio in particular. I just got off the phone with a lot of different nominees because we were just sending out our most recent round of checks. And the stories that they have of the ways that they're able to engage with people are just inspiring. There's a
Can you tell
woman that
us?
I spoke to who painted a bus blue. So she took the money that she got from Blue Ohio, and she used it to paint a school bus blue.
I saw this on social media.
Yes, on my Substack. So I do have a
Mhm.
Substack, and every state blue has a Substack. And I wrote about her because it was such an inspiring story. Laura Schaefer, she's running in Ohio for state house. And she took this school bus that she had, she painted it blue, and then now she drives it all over the district to the fair. When she goes canvassing, she drives it to go canvass and she parks it in front of the neighborhood that she's going to be at.
Right.
And she's able to really get the word out about her campaign in a really unique way. And the support that we gave her, she actually described it as being profound. And when I called her to ask her about that, she was telling other folks around the state that this was
Mhm.
profound. So I wanted to hear more about that so that I could share it with our community. And she said it was partly because she's in this really gerrymandered district. But the support that we gave her, that our community sent, enabled her to professionalize her campaign, to get the types of things that she needed to get right off the bat, right? So we sent her a check of about $6,000. So she was actually able to not just paint the bus, right? She was able to get the yard signs. She was able to get the palm cards, the things that she needed to go door knocking right away. So she could hit the ground running. She could start canvassing right away because she had the money to go and get the resources to make that happen. Without us, she wouldn't have had that so quickly. She
Mhm.
would have had to scramble a little bit at the beginning to get those resources. So it really does make a huge difference. And because of us, she then was able to get more support, right? Because people
Right.
see what she's doing. They're excited about her campaign. She's hit the ground running. Folks ask her, how much support have you already gotten? How's fundraising going? And she can say, along with Blue
Mhm.
Ohio's support of $6,000 plus some money from friends, I have this amount amassed, and that is impressive to donors who then
Right.
donate, and it's just this snowball, and we saw that I've seen that again and again with Blue Ohio supported nominees, where the support that we gave them early on meant that then they were able to get more people to donate because they just had
So
more resources that they were able to show folks that they were serious.
social proof is real, right? So people want to do things that they think successful people do.
That's exactly
So
it. Why yard signs folks say that yard signs don't vote, but yard signs encourage people to vote, right? So,
right.
you're smart about and again, going back to another Blue Ohio supported nominee, he was telling me that he's been pretty incredible about his strategy on yard signs, and he's triangulated the most, seen places and the people that he wants to have yard signs in their
Mhm.
front yards, like the folks in the neighborhood who are really well known and really well respected. Huge yard sign in their yard, right? Like
That's
these people are
fantastic.
being so creative and so smart with the way that they spend their resources. I wish after the election is over, I can't wait to share how their results and how they've
Mhm.
done electorally. But I think there's going to be a lot of surprises
Mhm.
because these people are doing some really amazing things. So
That's great. For me, the idea that they will bring out more voters, which will then support the top of the ticket in the party in general, is great. If you can even win some of those races, that's even better. So, one of the things that we know is that running for office is hard and getting people to do it, but in rural areas or very red areas is hard. So, how do you recruit or do you like team up with another organization who recruits? How do you get candidates in those races?
So we don't recruit. We just support the people who have been recruited. And our theory of change has always been that if we show people that there is support that is waiting for them, that it will make it much easier for the party and the folks whose mission is recruiting, it will make it much easier for them to do that. And that has actually borne out. In 2022, I want to say there were 19 races in Ohio that were uncontested. And this year there are 7, right?
Progress.
So,
Right.
yeah, it's impressive. Once you actually show people, if you run in this district, we're going to make sure that you're not doing it on your own. There's
Mhm.
this community of people that's over 1,000 strong that's gonna stand behind you, is gonna help you out. That
Mhm.
makes a big difference in someone's decision-making process. So I've heard that again and again on the
Mhm.
phones when people hear how much money they're going to get, that they really appreciate it and that they appreciated knowing that we were going to be there to lift them up. But to speak also to something that you mentioned about the impact of turning out voters, of supporting these down ballot races on turnout, it really is impressive. We already know Blue Missouri was actually started in 2017. So by 2020, we were able to run a study. We had a team from Washington University look at the impact of running people in races in Missouri. And what they came back with was really impressive. They found that just having a Democratic nominee on the ballot in these down ballot races for state legislature led to an increase in vote share for the top of the ticket by 1.5%. And that's massive. That's just having
That's
someone there. And then we also
right.
know that funding them, giving them the resources that they need to actually tell people that they are running
Right.
also increases turnout, right? So we have this huge bump in turnout, huge bump in vote share. We really should be running someone in every district, but we also should be supporting the people who are doing that work so that they can make sure that everyone knows that they're actually on the ballot.
So, if you don't do recruiting, how do people find out about these uncontested races in your states?
So that's a great question. And that is something that I imagine that Contest Every Race or the state
Mhm.
parties would be in charge of and involved
Mhm.
with. Our job really truly begins once the primary is over. Once the
Mhm.
primary is over, then we look at everyone's campaign finance filings and we total up how much they've raised over the course of the cycle. And then we start giving out funds first to the people who have raised the least. So that's how we do this bottom
Mhm.
up bathtub method where we bring everybody up to the same level, but how much each individual candidate gets depends upon how much they've raised already.
How do you crowdfund it? Where do you find the resources? Do you have partners in fundraising? Do you work with certain organizations to funnel money your way? How
No,
does that
we
work?
we don't actually. We create communities of monthly donors. That is another piece of this, is that the grassroots community, I believe, is the strongest force in American politics, and I
Mm,
think we've seen it again and again. I think
right.
it's underappreciated, but I appreciate it. And we never stop. These are evergreen, grassroots monthly giving communities. So in Ohio, we have over 1,000 people who chip in a few dollars a month. And we meet every month on the last Friday at noon.
Mhm.
Members get together and we hear from great guest speakers.
Mhm.
And recently, in the last couple of months, we've heard from a lot of the Blue Ohio supported nominees, which has been really fun. But folks just chip in and know that at the end of the cycle, the funds that have been amassed are going to be split amongst these nominees. And that's how we create this incredible grassroots machine. And it means that in Ohio, with 1,000 or so monthly donors, we've already this cycle raised and given away over $337,000.
Wow, that's phenomenal.
It is
And
amazing, isn't it?
and all
It's
of
what you
that
can do.
money right, and all of that money will show up in votes for Sherrod Brown or people higher up on the ticket that can affect national
So there are so
lots of
many
power.
huge benefits, right? So there's definitely the benefit for the top of the ticket, but there's also this huge benefit just in running in some of these rural spaces that otherwise wouldn't be contested or wouldn't have that kind of funding. So if you
Mhm.
think about it, that's $337,000 against Ohio Republican messaging that
Right.
now has been spread out in areas that honestly otherwise probably wouldn't have gotten that funding.
Mhm.
Right? So there's tons of effort and needs to be in Democratic messaging and strategy on suburban voters, ex-urban voters, turning all those people out.
Mhm.
Excellent. But we're taking it from a different tack, right? So while that effort is going on, we're actually focusing in the other direction on the rural voters, on the places where otherwise someone's not going to be able to get the word out. There
Mhm.
are voters in those districts.
Yeah,
I
there
tell
are.
people this all the time that there has never been a single district that has gone 100% for Republicans. So
Right.
we have to start going into rural spaces and talking to rural voters that agree with us, oftentimes on policy, but haven't heard from a Democrat in a really long time, right? So we left those rural spaces, but guess what? So did Republicans. Republicans haven't shown up in those places either. They take these places for granted. They think that they're gerrymandered beyond repair, but we can change that. And we can
Mhm.
certainly start chipping into their margins and, like John Fetterman did in Pennsylvania, win by more statewide by losing by less in some of these really red districts. Until eventually, over time, after we've spent a few cycles really working hard at
Mhm.
messaging and organizing and talking to people in these places, we'll be in a place to flip them. I
Right.
firmly believe that. I think that we'll be in a place to flip a lot of these places. It's just going to take us some time.
Exactly. If you look at it and say, "We're not going to win because we're not gonna win this race," then that is super short-sighted. And I talked to David Callahan a couple of weeks ago from Blue Tent, and I said, "How do you recommend that people spend their money?" Because there are swing states and there are swing districts, but there are also really red places that need the support, and it has to start somewhere. And he said that he recommends that people really do diversify their investment, and he's talking about bigger donors. But I think even just getting the word out to people that these small rural races matter. I talked to Paolo Cremides, who is in New York, but he has an organization that recruits young, diverse candidates for rural races across the country. And they have found enormous success
Yeah.
because a young person from the community maybe breaks some of the stereotypes about LGBTQ or a person of color because people have grown up with or watched the kid grow up if they're really young. So, yeah, that's one of my absolute joys, and a big part of the mission is to show how important every piece is. It's really not just about swing states. It's not all about the presidential election. It's a very large picture, and we all have our role to play, and sometimes multiple roles.
We do. And like I said, I think that we're the only organization that's actually focusing on the state legislative seats of the type that we're
Mhm.
talking about right now, right? So there are great organizations that are working on the flippable seats in the flippable states with the flippable state legislatures. That's amazing. That's wonderful. That is a huge piece of the pie. But there's a lot more pie. There's a
Mhm.
lot more that needs to be focused on. And I think that now that people are understanding the impact, the importance of state legislatures, we need to look to the places, the super red states and the red districts within those states and understand how important it is to have people fighting there as well, right? To have well resourced candidates fighting there. You think of the number of races that Democrats understand need resources and good messaging on a national scale, right? You think about when we run against Mitch McConnell, even though that's a really difficult seat for us to flip, right? We think about Lauren Boebert. She's in a more flippable seat, but Matt Gaetz, right? Marjorie Taylor Greene. We fund the races against those people in part because we want them to flip, but also because we want to make a statement. We want to make sure that the message gets in that district that we don't agree with this and that we're going to fight
Right,
against that. We need to take that same ethos, that same energy, and we need to spread it all over the country because Dobbs wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Mississippi.
right,
That's a Mississippi state law, right? We need to
exactly.
start thinking more strategically and more long term. These state legislatures have been used as a petri dish and a conservative playground for a really long time. And
Mhm.
so they're trying to nationalize that. They're taking it across the country through Project 2025, but also through the Supreme Court. So
Right,
everybody needs to understand the impact of these state legislatures, but it's not just the flippable state legislatures. It's the ones that are really red that are coming up with the worst of the worst policies that we all need to be worried about on a national basis. That's what Every State Blue is doing. We are specifically working in these red states. So if people are interested in that, they should go to everystateblue.org and learn more about our mission. Please reach out to us because we would love to expand to more places if we had more resources and more targeted investment. It would be amazing to me. That's our mission, is to do it. That's our name. That's what we want to
Mhm.
do. We can only do so much. So we're really looking for that assistance from folks.
All right, so everybody, everystateblue.org. So you provide these candidates with financial resources. Do you provide them with any other kind of resources?
No,
No? Messaging,
no.
introductions to tools, nothing?
No. I mean, our job, we are resource thin, right? As
Mhm.
an organization, and we focus all of our attention and all of our resources on this specific thing, solving this specific problem, and recognizing that there are amazing organizations in each of the states that we operate, but also
Mhm.
nationally, that are doing the recruitment and that are doing the training. And so we early on said, we want to focus on this specific piece and allow these other organizations to do the excellent work that they're already doing, not stepping on their toes, but
Right, right.
instead lifting them up. So, to a certain extent, yes, absolutely. We amplify what other great organizations are doing, but we're not reinventing the wheel in any of those places.
That's really important. I think that wheel reinvention happens a lot, which is what I try to show people in one part of the country, what people are doing in other parts of the country so they don't have to create it all from scratch. And now you are the very first, you're not the first woman I have interviewed, but you are the first of my new focus to lift up the voices of women primarily. And there's so many very smart men out there, and I've talked to a lot of them, but there are a lot of really smart and dynamic women all over the country in the state level, at every level. And so you are the first of this new focus.
I am honored to be the first of your new focus, and I think it's a great one.
What I try to do is, assume that my listeners are activists
Mhm.
and candidates and possibly people who have already made it to office. And if I want to support your candidates, either by letting people know about you guys for them to send money, but to provide a larger picture for them to get to understand, what would you suggest are the most important things for people running? I know you don't do training and all of that, but the people who are novices, who are running in places where there's not a lot of structure, where the party probably hasn't hung out in a long time, what's important for them to know?
I like to say that our organization empowers nominees to be themselves. I think that it's really important if you are running for office that you stay true to who you are. And so I think that it's important for folks not to try to be something that they're not to do something just because they feel like that's the way that it's supposed to be.
Mm,
I think a great example is the woman that I told you about at the beginning of our conversation, Laura,
mhm,
who painted a school bus blue and drove it around her neighborhood. Incredibly creative, right? She's a very creative person, obviously really smart, and is willing to take some risks. That's who she is. That's great. There's another nominee down in Tennessee who, when I was on the phone with her, letting her know how much we were going to be sending her, those are always very fun conversations, by the way.
mm.
But she said, I've got some barnwood in the barn, some leftover barnwood. I think I'm going to get some paint. With this, I'm going to get some paint and I'm going to start painting some signs. Do you think that'd be okay? And I said, that'd be amazing, right? But she's a woman with a barn and she's creative and she's artistic. If you're running for office in your community, you are already doing something amazing and you should amplify that part of yourself. It's part of your community, right? So some of my favorite stories from nominees are the ones who tell me that they used the money for things like a chili cook-off or the parade entry,
Mhm.
things that amplify their own place in the community that they love and that they want to represent. That is just great stuff. And really important, I think, for us to look at these races as community races. Taking this to a bit of a national analogy, everyone is really excited. Maybe I shouldn't say everyone, but I am very excited about Governor Tim Walz. He is a politician that is unique in a lot of ways. And one of those ways is that he doesn't feel like a politician. And I think that in some ways, he's breaking that mold for people in a really important way, especially for our rural candidates who look at politics and think that there's a right way to be a
Mhm.
politician, and there is not. You are
Right.
a community leader who is asking your community to give you a specific job. That's it. And you can do that in any number of ways. And so I like to empower them and tell them to show us all, to show the Democrats nationally how you should run a race in their district. They are the experts. And I hope that Democrats pay attention in these places and allow people to be who they really are because it's really incredible.
It sounds like, giving them the resources allows their own creativity to flourish.
It does, because we don't give money with strings attached either. I think that's important for folks to know. So I call them and I say, you're getting a check for $5,000 or $7,000 or however much we have that they've qualified for. And then they're able to take those funds and use them for a bus or use them for paint for barnwood signs. And those are the kinds of things, the kinds of creative uses of funds that they might not be comfortable doing, they might not
Mhm.
be able to be as comfortable with if they were scrabbling for whether or not they were going to have money for palm cards or for yard
Mhm.
signs. We're giving them permission to be themselves by giving them funds with no strings attached and then standing back and watching this magic happen that is just making me really excited.
That's so exciting. How did you get involved in this work?
So it was in the dark days after 2016 when I started a blog. It was, I'm a lawyer by training, and I was noticing that a lot of people were wondering what they could do, what they should do. There was a lot of confusion. What's Congress? What's the House? What's the Senate? How does a bill become law? There were lots of questions like this. And so
Mhm.
I started a blog called Small Deeds Done, which is based on the old Peter Marshall quote that small deeds done are better than great deeds planned. And that blog still exists. It's actually on Substack now, which is really exciting because I just moved it over there not very long ago. And it's been a really fun place, a wonderful community. But it was through that that I met Jonathan Zucker, who is the first COO and second CEO of Act Blue.
Mm.
And he too, in the dark early morning hours in November 2016, saw his Facebook community, his Facebook friends sniping at one another and saying this was Hillary's fault, this was Bernie's fault, and said this has to stop. And we need to start working towards 2018. He knew that we needed to start that work right then. And so he started an organization called It Starts Today. Excellent idea, which was to crowdfund with small dollar monthly donations for Congress. And that was our very first project. But it was through Small Deeds that I met Jonathan. We worked together on some content that we were putting together, worked really well. And he came to visit Missouri, where he's from. Had coffee and we're saying, Congress is really important to focus on, but really these state legislatures, this is really where it's at. And so we started our very first state legislative project in 2017. And so It Starts Today is now every state blue, and It Starts Today Missouri is now blue Missouri. And so over the course of the last however many years, we've really iterated and changed how we've funded candidates. Like I said, we had that study in 2020. And after we saw how impactful it was to have people running in every race and how impactful it was to get funding, minimal funding to nominees, that's when we actually changed how we fund candidates. That's when we started funding from the bottom up rather than funding every Democratic nominee for Missouri State Legislature, which is how we had been managing it before.
'Cause a lot of those people have plenty of money. They may or
They
may not
do.
spend it.
I think it's important for people to understand that in a state, in Missouri, our flippable state legislative districts have been determined by a red legislature, right? A
Yes.
supermajority. They have drawn those districts and they have not drawn them to be nice to Democrats. And they have decided where the fight's going to be. Right.
Mhm.
So, over a really long time, we have conditioned Republicans to know and understand that we are not going to fight everywhere. We are only going to fight in a certain number of districts, and they are the districts that we think are the closest to being flipped. So, they decide where they want to fight. And
Right.
then we bring quite a few resources, right? So the flippable state legislative seats in my state in Missouri will get $500,000. That's not uncommon. I haven't looked this year to see how much
Mhm.
they've raised, but they have quite a few resources to
Mhm.
bring to those races. But then there will be in Missouri, our funding floor is $6,000, and we just funded 43 state legislative nominees. So we
That's
had
fantastic.
43 state legislative nominees that had less than $6,000. So if that tells you this disparity between the haves and the have-nots, and the
Mhm.
districts that we think are flippable and the districts that we consider unwinnable or lost causes, right?
It's stupid though because it's so short-sighted because those are votes. If they're out there just asking for votes, it's a vote we didn't have.
There was an article in the New York Times just this last week where they were talking about the number of races that are uncontested in some of these rural spaces in Missouri and plenty of other states. And that is absolutely the case. In state after state, this happens. 59% of the state legislative races in Mississippi went uncontested in 2023.
Right.
59%,
And you would
right?
think that would be there's contest every race, and I talk to them, and there's run for something, and there's outrun coalition, and I think that there can never be too many groups who reach out and recruit people because in Mississippi, a member of any one of those communities is capable. Even just thinking about my community, would I ever think that I'd run for office? I'm not sure. And so I think that's just not the default. And so reminding people that they don't just have to vote, but they can also run and that there are people and organizations that will support them, I think is pretty
Yeah,
important.
I think that's really important, right? And hopefully someday every state blue has a project in every state because like I said, I think that we're the only organization that I know of across the country that is focusing specifically on these races where people otherwise just don't have any resources at all.
Mhm.
And I think that's a very important piece that's been overlooked and that we're trying to that's the gap that we're trying to fill. That's the problem that we're trying to solve. Because there's a lot of great organizations that are out there recruiting people to run, but then once they sign on the dotted line, it's a really tough road.
Right.
And it's made a lot easier when they know that there's Blue Ohio that is going to catch their fall.
Right.
It makes it a lot easier for someone who's sitting there at the kitchen table trying to weigh whether or not she wants to run against the, you know, anti-LGBTQ, pro-gun, anti-abortion extremist in a really red gerrymandered district. She's got a tough decision to make. She's got a family, she's got a
Mhm.
job, she might lose a lot of friends, she might lose her job in order to run.
Mhm.
The least we can do is make sure that she has the resources to hit the ground running.
So are you guys working on other states or are you just where you are right now?
For this cycle, obviously, we are where we are. Our last disbursement will be at the end of this month. If folks do want to join any of our projects, if they do want to give one time to any of our projects, they can do that until the end of the month. They can go to everystateblue.org and find out where we are. We're in
Mhm.
Missouri, Ohio, and Tennessee, and then nationally with Forgotten Democrats. I get questions every time I do a podcast interview like this. Every time I put out an article on Substack, I get another question from some other state, from someone from someplace. Arkansas, Alabama, Mississippi, Utah, Indiana,
Mm.
Kentucky, like Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, South
Right.
Carolina. I've talked to people from all over the place. And the answer is always absolutely. We just need to get the resources in place in order to launch in more states. And that's really where the Democratic community writ large comes into play. We are an organization that is scrappy and grassroots as they come, and
Mhm.
we do depend upon support from donors in order to keep the lights on. So
Mhm.
if folks want to see us launch in other states, please reach out, let me know. We'll have a conversation. It might at this point have to be after the election because we're a little busy writing checks and calling folks, but I'd love to start those conversations and I'd love to make every state blue.
Absolutely. Like, who would? So, Michelle, is there anything else you would like our listeners who are activists and candidates and donors and people who are really dialed in? Is there anything else you would like them to know?
I want them to know just what a difference they're making. I want them to know that everyone's got a lot going on right now. Emotions are really high. People are worried, people are excited, but I want the people who are working on the ground, I want you to know that I see you and I see what you're doing and I see how hard it is and that you keep coming back day after day, month after month, year after year. And here we are, a few months away from an election, yet again, the most important an election in our lifetime, right? I appreciate everything that everyone's done. We would not be where we are right now were it not for everyone working so hard, so hard over the last however many years.
Yeah. There's a lot of people I talked to that said the day after election day in 2016, I fell apart. And then I started doing so. Then I
Yeah,
started.
that was the watershed moment for so many people who felt like they didn't matter. That was the moment when people looked at themselves and said, wait a second, I thought that someone somewhere had a spreadsheet and had everything figured out and that I wasn't needed. Maybe I am needed. Maybe I could be important. Maybe I could help. Maybe I could make a difference.
Mhm.
And that's millions of people, tens of millions now, who have woken up to their own power. And that is so powerful. And that's what we're trying to capture with Blue Ohio, Blue Missouri, and Blue Tennessee is creating these communities of people who, yes, we lift up the nominees, but we're also creating a community of ourselves. And we're
Mhm.
lifting ourselves up and reminding each other what an amazing difference we can all make when we all row in the same direction.
I am so delighted to see it. It keeps growing every cycle. And then to watch what has bloomed, particularly since Harrison Walls became the ticket, is incredibly exciting.
It is. It is.
Thank you
And
for coming
it's
on.
only gonna get better. It's only gonna get better, right? If everybody listening keeps on, you keep on keeping on, keep trucking,
Y-
it's only gonna get better from here.
Yeah, there's a lot of room to go up. Lot- All
That's
that
true.
high potential power building.
That's true. That's true.
Well,
Thank
thanks
you
for
for
coming
everything that
on.
you're doing. Thanks for highlighting folks. I think it's really important. The work that you're doing, spreading the word is really great. So, thank you.
Thank you for listening to Freedom Over Fascism. Please leave a rating or review wherever you listen. If you can, please subscribe at www.freedomoverfascism.us.